Hi guys. Last day we left out till the basic form of forms, that is name, username, password, uh, having a submit button, a reset button, doing drop down lists and checkboxes. So these are the three aspects that we covered in the last video, and today we will do a bit more about the forms. Today we'll learn how to use the label attribute, label tag. I'm sorry, pardon me. It would be a label tag. So label tag with the for attribute, and input tag with the ID attribute. So why do we use label tags and label tags and ID attributes is a topic of discussion today. So as we explained earlier, I think we did why we use form tags. When you're starting any kind of form, you use a form tag. While ending, you close the form tag in the last bit. And then action attribute is the URL where your form is getting stored in the database, and method get is how you retrieve the data from the database. If you have short and precise method of retrieving data, or not processing complex data, you usually use the get method. If it's too complex of a process to retrieve, delete, update, or get any kind of data out from a large database, you use post as a method. So and in this case we are learning labels. So what are labels used for? Labels are mostly used when you want to identify particular tags, when you want to make it very specific to the browser, to the web browser, that this is the information that I am passing in the form. Labels are not necessary, but if you want to write really large forms, things could get complicated. Labels come in very handy in such cases to distinguish and differentiate between a variety of data. You could have your first name, last name, in my case user ID, then password, and then your maybe bank details or registration details, your sign up values, key IDs, and then date of birth, and so on and so forth. So when forms are really long, and when you need the web browser to be able to distinguish, and the web server as well, to distinguish between the different sets of values, um, so that the right value is attached to the right tag, you would need a label for that. And with the label comes the for attribute. For attribute is a must if you are writing labels. So you would need to mention um, what you are using the label for. So in this case, I have created a label first name, and so this, for the for attribute, I need something to represent my first name. So I'm naming it F name, which colloquially maybe short in a shorthand fashion stands for first name. So that is the short version of the first name. And maybe I'm using last name here, so I'm using L name. So that is just to represent the right kind of context in which you are making the label. So the last name will be visible to the user, but the web browser, the search engine, and the web crawlers will read the for attribute of the label, and will identify, okay, so the last name is with the L name, so anything with L name is last name. Now that being said, labels are always attached to input tags as well, because input tag is your key to entering the value. Your value is getting entered because of the input tag. Label is for the user and the web crawler. The user is seeing first name, but the web server and the search engines are identifying the very first name as f name, because you have used that in the for attribute. Input type equal to text, id equal to f name. Mind you, for the input tag, whenever you are using labels, you must use id attribute to represent the for. So id value represents the corresponding for value. So this is where your data actually gets entered. um, so id equal to f name, so you are creating the correspondence with the label. Label for equal to f name, input id equal to f name. Then type text or type password is a secondary question, because you will name it accordingly depending on which type of value you are entering, whether it is text, password, or number. But id is a must if you are using the for. Label for and input id comes together. Keep that in mind as a pair. Then you are using name, f name. Okay, not necessary but good to use. Label for l name, last name, input type text, id l name l name. So as already said, input type is text because you are naming your last name. id equal to l name because the label for is equal to l name. So last name is represented as l name for the server side or the search engine side. And how will they identify if the value you have entered is the last name? That is where the input id comes in. Input id equal to l name, and then you could or could not, whatever you like, say name equal to last name or l name, whatever. It's not necessary to have a name attribute here, but it's suggested, it's a good practice, so I'm including it anyway. Next is user label for user id. User id label, input type equal to text, id equal to user id, name equal to user id. So three things here. Now we are getting to the user id part. So the label for, you're clearly mentioning to the server that, see, this is user id, and then the kind of value that you are entering in the input is, but the kind of value you are entering is text. And also you are mentioning that input id equal to user id, which is synonymous to the label for user id. So the user side as well as the server side, both of them know that you are entering the value for user id. And then comes password, label password, and then input type equal to password. Now for password, I haven't used any id of the sort because it is not required, it might not be necessary. Label for value is not needed in a password because anyway it comes in hidden dotted lines, but you must mention the type that you are entering a password. Whether or not you mention anything else, you need to mention input type equal to password. Input type text, id user id, name user id. So for all the other text values, as you can see here, we have had label for as a value, which is which, to distinguish the similar kind of values, because all of them are text. So you had an id and a for value. Label has a for value and input has an id corresponding value to that for value, and that is how you have made entries to the first few lines: first name, last name, and user id. And then you have the input type password, and you enter the password. Then these two buttons, submit button and a reset button. So type submit, value submit, input type reset, value clear. So yeah, so in this case instead of going old fashioned, I thought, we could use a clear button, which is kind of the same functionality as reset. So the button type remains reset and the value I have mentioned as clear. Let's run the program and see what comes up. Yeah, seems like I had mentioned few tags, few entries before, in user id and password. Okay, let's type in the name. Okay, so yeah, so there is first name, there is last name, and then submit. Right, it is submitted. Okay, great. Right, if I might want to clear it, see, things get reset now. So the form is functional, which is nice. Now what do we do next? We will probably get on with labeling. So labels can be used in two situations. So we have labels for two purposes. One thing is to wrap around an input tag with type and value attribute. To wrap around an input tag with type and value attributes. So the input tag must have a type and a value attribute, and the labels can wrap around it, or used with for attribute to print labels for specific input ID. These two are very important to note. Labels can be used for two purposes. One is to wrap around an input tag with type and value attribute. Two, used with for attribute to print labels for a specific input ID. Now label strong age. Now I am using keyword strong, it's not necessary, but if you want to highlight or emphasize on a certain piece of writing, you might use the strong keyword. Label age, input type equal to number, name equal to age, required equal to required. Now mind you, for form validation you will always have to use keywords like this. Now there are specific set of attributes and keywords that you might need to learn in order to validate a form. Required essentially means that you must fill that part of the box. One section of the box must be filled. Yeah, so where were we? Yeah, we need to know keywords like required, kind of similar to checked and selected, but I would not root for it very strongly, because Label has an entirely different purpose. It's form validation that's happening. Form validation meaning that if you do not enter a certain bit of value, they will throw error or type in a message within the form itself. So, required as a value would only validate the form. So, suppose if you forget to enter the age, they will show you an error and maybe give you a text message showing that you haven't entered your age. We need to know your valid age, or things like that. That is called form validation. Now, so here we are using label with the input tag. Label is age and input tag shows you the kind of value you are entering, the name of the value for better understanding of the server side, and the validation part, which is it is required. So input type, name, and required for the first label that we have here. The second label, now gender, input id equal to female, type equal to radio. Now we are introducing radio buttons here, so that is why I am using the id, type equal to radio, name equal to gender, value equal to f, and checked. Label for female. So I just wanted to show you how you are using the for attribute with label and input id. So here we are using input id female, type radio, name gender, value female, that is f, and then checked. uh, so similarly, so what do we use here for the for of the label? You see the id matches with the input id. That is, for female labels we have id equal to female, then type equal to radio, name equal to gender, and value equal to f, and checked equal to checked. So this is a checked, that this is a defaulted value for a radio button. Since it is a radio button, it is a must for us to type in the input type, the name for which the value you are selecting, that is, in this case we are selecting name of gender, and value we are putting out as f, because that is how the server side will understand. And for the next tag we have, because it's the same selection, same choices, the label is gender still going on. And for the next part, so this is the female tagline done, female selection of radio button done. Now the next one is the male. So input type we have id equal to male, type equal to radio, name equal to gender, and value equal to m for male. So this id, input id, again matches with the label for equal to male. Now since we are using radio button, you need to key in that it is a type radio, and then name equal to gender for server side to understand, value equal to m, representing the actual value of what you're checking in an abbreviation, say. So yeah, so we have label for male equal, label for equal to male, and then male as a label, and then you close the label. And yeah, so that's a pretty neat way of using label tags. Now label tags are, so finally to conclude, label tags are used in two places. One is for wrapping around text with input tag having a type and a name and a value attribute, type and value attribute mostly, or it is used with for attribute to print labels for a specific input ID. Right. So that is pretty much why we use labels for. Let's run this program and have a better understanding. Right. So as you can see, uh, let's minimize this a little bit. Here you might have noticed one thing. I have used input type equal to number. So I am getting a drop down list or increase decrease button for numbers, because I want to enter my age. So if you don't want to use text to type in, you could also use input type equal to number. That's a nifty idea, very easy to implement. um, you have this upper arrow and upper increment arrow and decrement arrow. You could use these to sort of put in an age. Now after we have keyed in our age, we have this gender label, input id equal to female, uh, value equal to f. So type and value, so mind you, if you are using a label for an input tag, input id, type and value is a must. Type and value is a must, to be more specific, if you want to use labels with any input tag. But if you also want to be specific about the kind of values you are using or the buttons that you want to key in, you might want to use id, input id equal to female, and then label for equal to female. So that should coincide with each other. That has to be similar to be correctly representative of the value that you will be selecting. So you could use male or female. My default value selected here, see, I have checked in for the female value by default. So if you don't want to select anything, it will probably end up there. And then the submit button. And for submit here, you might notice that I have used an image. The image is pretty helpful in case you want to use different kind of different looking button. So I have written input type equal to image instead of input type equal to submit, which is a usual um, built-in submit button. And I wanted to use src instead of that, so I'm keying in type equal to image instead of an src. um, Previously you have seen the image, the submit buttons in a certain format, and that wasn't an image, that was the built-in default style, which is very plain and simple, nothing against that. But you could improvise on your buttons if you want to with an image. You need to save the image in the same folder as previously said, and then input type equal to image and src because you are linking the source of your saved file, and then height equal to how long, what should be the length, what should be the width, and create the button. And then obviously absolutely don't forget to write the the value for value attribute. So you need to assign values to the value attribute before you forget. So although this is an image, you must remind that this is a value kind of this is a submit kind of a value. so that the form understands that you are associating this image with submit. So the value has to be submit in any case. And yeah, so that is pretty much why we are using labels for. If you didn't use id, so what would be the difference if you used radio buttons without the id? Now I would like to make a point here. Can you really see me do this, which is I'm clicking on to the writing and my choice is getting selected? So I'm not necessarily having to click within the concentric circle, or within the limited tiny teeny bit of space where I can possibly try fitting my mouse, but it's kind of difficult. So this using input id attribute with the labels was mostly formulated for the vision impaired, or people with weaker eyesight. It becomes difficult for a person with weaker eyesight to kind of um, complete a form by himself or herself. So they find it really hard to locate uh, this tiny circle where you have to click or tick in to make a choice. Instead, you could use this written part, or the written option, even without ticking onto the circle. You don't have to be specific pinpointed. You place your key or mouse anywhere within the writing and it just clicks the option onto itself. So it provides a larger scope, larger readability, and easier selection options for the vision impaired. So that's very nifty if you want to really. That's a amazing trivia if you want to use input buttons with labels. So input id has to be used with the radio buttons in order to make them more easier to work with. So that is what we did over here. In a previous radio button, maybe let me show you the difference between an ordinary radio button and this. So let's take for example, we are going to a different website now which only says radio buttons. So yeah, so from here I want to select whichever piece of civilization that I would like to belong. See, my markers don't work here very well. So the mouse, once I'm trying to select a certain section, even if I click on the writing, the radio buttons are not getting selected. So I have to be very specific to go to the teeny hole and select the circle. So circling out is difficult if you are vision if you don't have a very strong vision, or if you have color blindness. So that is where you could use input id tag with radio buttons and labels to sort of give you that larger scope of selection that you could make in a small bit of space if you are vision impaired. And see, so here I am clicking on the writing itself and still the cursor is doing the selection for me. um, so that is an advantage that you have when you use labels or input IDs along with radio buttons. um, So here we learned the labeling bit. So just in case you are using radio buttons, remember to use the label for below the input ID, because input ID essentially means that your selection option or the circle where you are selecting will appear on the left. If you want them, the convention is to make the selection option appear on the left. So we use the input ID on the top so that it appears to the left of the writing for the label. The label always comes below the input type or input ID in a particular form, because we want the writing for the selection to appear on the right conventionally. For example, the selection option for the mail button appears on the left of mail. So the writing part, the label part comes into the right, because the writing is the label part, and the selection part, that is the input ID and input type, etc., all come to the left, because your selection option lies in the left, which is the convention rule. So that is what we did here. I hope I could explain the significance of radio button and the scope of readability with labels and input IDs and radio buttons at the same time working together. Um, then we have grouping field set. Right, this would be interesting to observe, because grouping field set, why do we use it? First thing is grouping makes complex forms easier to read. Easier to read as well as easier to make an UI of. The user interface becomes a lot smoother when you group things in a field set instead of making one large form. It takes a longer time to load, as well as it could create issues with readability, and it would be a scattered user interface. People would probably not know where to put in which kind of values, neither would the server know, so that increases the chances of error for a complex form. And that is why we use labels. One thing is that, and the other part is we could also use field sets. Field sets define the specific region, or the encircle or contain. Field set is essentially a box within which a form can be contained. So field set really encircles what you want to save within a form. Also, you always use legends along with field sets. Field sets never come alone. Field set and legends come together in pairs, and there are reasons for it. Uh, the legend would segmentize your form into different sections. Suppose you have a large form, you have your details to enter, which is maybe your name, your age, your gender, which is your personal details. Second, you could have your contact details like email ID, like phone number or mobile number, and you could have your institutional details, like for example employee ID, or say work registration number, things like that. So what legends do is they segmentize out your subsections for a particular form. For example, in this case I'm entering my details, so I'm asking the form the person reading the form to enter their details, and which is, so the first label is name. Now see, notice that first comes legend, then comes field set. So the field set part comes under legend. Legend defines what the field set will be. So if there is a box, the entire box of your details is a field set. Now your details, the heading, is the legend for that field set. Label name usual, input type equal to text, name equal to identity, required equal to required. So I'm doing the form validation bit here, stating that this is a must field to enter. You must enter this name part of the form, you can't skip it. Second, label age, input type number, name, age, required. Then you have label gender, input okay, so for the gender we have radio buttons, so we'll first use the input tags, then the label tags follow later. The label tags come below the input tags because input tags have to appear, the selection buttons have to appear on the left, and the labels to the same buttons appear on the right conventionally. So input id equal to m, radio type equal to radio, name equal to gender, value equal to male, and checked equal to checked. So that is pretty much the whole gender section. So input id equal to m, type equal to radio, name equal to gender, value equal to male, checked equal to checked, because initially I want the label male to be checked in by default. You could skip this if you don't want a default value. Then you could use label for m because your input id is m, and then male, then label. Same goes for the next option, input id f, type radio, name gender, value female. Then label for f, female, label, then you backslash label because you are exiting out. So this label is the label for the input button, right? And this is the actual label for this entire subsection where you are entering your gender. So your gender has one label, and then within that label you have input tags with male and female choice options of a radio button, along with their own kind of label with a different id, different for. Same goes for the previous one where you have a label for the name, and since this is not a choice option, you are not making a choice here or selection here. It's the regular input type equal to text, name equal to identity, and value is not necessarily required because this is not a checkbox option or selection option, so to speak. So these are done. Then you key in your email id, label email id, type email, name email, required. Now I'm giving a validation. Lastly, I'm making a checkbox here, input type equal to checkbox, name equal to subscribe, value equal to subscribe. I'm making a subscription button, so this looks like more of a newsletter subscription kind of scenario, where you have your own details in one side with name, age, and gender, email ID with a label, type, name, and validation. So, note one thing that for most cases of input tags here, type and name are the two must attributes for any input tag, but you will have to include a value tag in case you are entering a specific value that you want to distinguish from other values. Just in case you have few options to select from which are similar but not same, as in gender you have radio buttons for male and female. For singers you have different name of singers. So in that case the value attribute becomes a more suggested necessary part of the game. But other than that, when you are using ordinary values instead of selecting options, you don't need a value attribute. The type and name will do fine. Value attribute comes in when you have options to select from, and then you have an input ID and you are using an abbreviation for the ID. So you are not writing ID equal to male, because most IDs are usually one lettered or two lettered, but yeah, for most cases IDs are very short. In that case value might be necessary because you might want to explain what are the options available, and there are a lot of similar options. So in that case you have type, name, and value for an input ID. So yeah, so you have a checkbox option where you have input type equal to checkbox, name equal to subscribe, value equal to subscribe, and that is checked by by default. Would you like to subscribe to our email list? And then you have a submit button, a reset button for submit form and reset form. Let's run the program, shall we, and understand what it is all about. Right, so you have your details. What's wrong with these people? Okay, looks like I might need to redo a bit. Bear with me for a moment, please. Where is my code? So here you have the name, the age, the gender to select from, the email ID, and see, this is the checkbox that we have by default selected by checking in, checked equal to checked. And then would you like to subscribe to our newsletter or our email list? So yeah, here you will have to give a name, and if you don't give a name and try submitting it, they will probably tell you fill out these fields. So this is the form validation part where you are writing required equal to required and it's a must fill. So that you need to keep in mind. The age has number, as is most ages where you have to type in numbers into the boxes or write in words. That wouldn't be necessary. If you say age Then this tiny increment decrement box appears on the sidebar, allowing you to increase or decrease the number based off of your age. Then here also we have used input ID and radio buttons to sort of use the form selection. So radio buttons, input ID and labels together. Input ID equal to male or female, M or F. Then type equal to text, type equal to radio button, and then value equal to male or female. And then in label you write for, label for M. If you have input ID equal to M, then label is follows the same pattern, and so on and so forth. We have explained the same thing earlier, so that is pretty much what you might need to do. Right, so our session ends here. We start the next session from another day. Thanks for tuning in, and see you on the next video.